Today's webinar brought to you by Orchard Technologies Solutions. Orchard Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Fluid-based testing products provide a simplified collection process, faster results, cost savings with minimal risk of tampering, dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The oral fluid drug test is an FDA-cleared, laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. It was the #1 recognized brand name in oral fluid testing in a 2014 National Drug Testing Industry Survey. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. Today titled, "Are you doing enough alcohol testing to make your workplace safer?" and will be presented by Bill Current and Mike Dyer. Bill is the president of the Current Consulting Group, a national consulting firm that specializes in drug testing policy development and helping employees optimize their employee screening program. He is the editor of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com. He also publishes the e-newsletter State Drug Testing Laws Monthly. Mr. Current is the former executive director of the American Council for Drug Education and served as vice president of consulting for a national third-party administrator of drug testing and background screening services. He's author or co-author of 2 books on substance abuse issues, including Why Drug Testing. He administers the annual drug testing industry survey, now in its 16th year, the results of which will be presented at the SAPA conference in September of 2015. Dyer is the president of Alpha Pro Solutions, an internationally recognized drug-free workplace web, VidCam, and classroom training provider, and is a DOT testing service agent and consulting company. Alpha Pro Solutions is an authorized distributor of drug and alcohol testing devices, including DOT-approved breathalyzers, EBTs, and alcohol screening devices, ASDs, and supplies. It serves the drug-free workplace, safety, health, and medical industries in regulated and non-regulated markets. APS has set the standard for top-quality, interactive, dynamic, computer-based training and provides classroom training on-site or via webcam based on your specific program needs. APS consultants conduct policy review and internal audits and can assist you in complying with the federal and state regulations and to help you establish attainable safety goals that save you time and money. This team and highly qualified trainers and safety consultants are considered experts in their field. It will now be our pleasure to hear from Bill Current and Mike Dyer.
All right, Jessica, and first I'd like to just acknowledge both Orchard Technologies and Alpha Pro Solutions for co-sponsoring today's webinar on alcohol testing. I'm excited about the opportunity to present with Mike. I've known Mike for many years and have been a big fan of Alpha Pro Solutions, really one of the premier providers of a variety of training topics and training services. And I've got coming up a little later in today's presentation with a little bit more information about Alpha Pro Solutions, which I'll pause on for a moment when I introduce Mike a little bit later. We're going to talk testing, obviously, today. That's our topic. And I think it's safe to say, if the drug and alcohol testing business, meaning if you're providing these types of services, and a lot of providers on today's webinar, but also if you're an employer or you work in some type of other organization where you're doing drug testing, let's say, for example, I think sometimes it just feels like alcohol testing sort of gets the short shrift. And there are reasons for that. But there is, the federal government bears this out. There are millions upon millions of people in our country who unfortunately are alcohol abusers, misers, and even alcoholics. And the fact that there are so many of them really creates this on which the chances that none of them work for you, none of them work for your clients is really almost impossible to imagine. There are too many people in our country with alcohol. And alcohol abusers and those who misuse alcohol are less. They're likely to be involved in workplace accidents. They're more likely to file a workers' compensation claim or use their health care benefits, all of which has an impact on the bottom line of a company. Now, the Department of Transportation mandates alcohol testing under certain circumstances. In fact, they mandate random alcohol testing. And each mode of the Department of Transportation, each agency has a different frequency rate for random alcohol testing, et cetera. But there's alcohol testing built into those regulations, and even we're not really going to talk about state alcohol testing laws as it pertains to the workplace. States that prohibit testing for alcohol is in a post-accident or reasonable suspicion situation. Now, there's federal law that comes into play, of course, with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we've got several slides explaining how the ADA affects alcohol testing in the workplace a little later. But the matter is, the bottom line is that alcohol testing is permitted. We don't do much of it for a lot of reasons, as I said, but failing to really take this issue seriously is placing in jeopardy our ability to secure a workplace and truly make it a drug-free workplace. And so an appropriate level, let's say, of alcohol testing is the right thing to do. It's a smart thing to do as well. There are lots of drug abuse. I've got some slides in here on drug abuse in the United States. I'm going to share them with you. There's stuff in here, you know, get these slides afterwards. So there's stuff in here that I won't take the time to read, of course. The point I want to make here is that there are a lot of studies and statistics out on drug abuse, and it paints a pretty bleak picture. Now, 2013. This is information that came out from the federal government in 2014, reflected in 2013. So the latest information, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health from the federal government will come around August, September timeframe. So this is really the latest information that we have on drug and alcohol abuse in the United States. And as you can see, in 2013, there were nearly 25 million Americans 12 and older who interview over the phone admitted that they had used an illicit drug at least once in the month prior to being surveyed. So that's about 9.4% of the population 12 and older, but these numbers are based on the level of the person who's being surveyed. And so the government at one point did a study on the accuracy of this annual survey that they do, and found that the number are probably about one less than what really are. So we're looking at 24 million Americans who admit to being past month drug users, illicit drugs, let's put it that way. Probably about 8 million more than that. It's around 32, 33 million thereabouts. Keep that as we go through and we talk about the alcohol abuse statistics coming up. Okay. Certainly the number one commonly used illicit drug in the United States, 19.8 million people admit to being current users of marijuana. And that's a percentage that has gone up significantly. As you can see, it went up from 18.2 in 2012 to 19.8 in 2013. And daily or almost daily use of marijuana. That's a person who admits to using it on 20 or more days in the past month. Increased from 5.1 million between 2005 and 2007 to 8.1 million in 20. This could very well be a reflection of the legalization of marijuana that is taking place throughout the country. Yes, 4 states plus the District of Columbia have legalized marijuana, period. Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and the District of Columbia, marijuana is legal. There's some restrictions on it, but it's legal. It's restricted to medical use. 24 states that have legalized marijuana for medical purposes, for medicinal use. There's abuse of those laws that are going on, and it's reflected in the fact that there's just a lot more people using marijuana. So, again, we're somewhere with all of this as it relates to alcohol abuse. Just a chart that sort of breaks down drug abuse by drug categories: marijuana, prescription drugs, which are all the oxys and the hydros, et cetera, cocaine, hallucinogens, inhalants, and I want you to look at these numbers, though. 9.8 million, obviously a big number as it pertains to marijuana, drops down significantly when you get into the prescription drug family, 6.5 million, and then drops down even more for cocaine and other drugs, okay? When we talk to the alcohol abuse problem, we're talking about completely different numbers, much, much higher numbers, okay? But we're talking about different categories of abusers as well. Okay, so first of all, a current drinker, a current a current illicit drug user are probably maybe two different things. Now, of course, the government also measures the drug abuse, which includes people who abuse alcohol and smoke marijuana, or who abuse alcohol and use cocaine. I don't know statistics to show today, but if we're going to break it out by drug abuse, the couple slides that we just looked at, and alcohol abuse, there are 136, almost 137 million current drinkers. These are people who, in the survey, admit to using alcohol at least once in the last 30 days. Okay, it's less than half of all Americans 12 and older. 100 compared to, what did we look at before? 24.6 million, I think it was, on the illicit drug use category. Now, second, if we look at binge drinkers, and that's defined by the government as somebody who admits to having 5 or more drinks on the same occasion on at least one day in the past 30 days, the 30 days prior to being surveyed, there's 60.1 million. So again, the number is higher than those numbers we see under illicit drug use. 22.9% of the population, 12 and older, admit to being binge drinkers. Go into one more category, and that's heavy alcohol users. These are drinkers. These are people who admit to binge drinking. Remember the definition of binge drinking. These are people who admit to binge drinking on at least 5 days in the past 30 days prior to being surveyed. Okay? And here the number is 16.5 million. It's worse, right? But people who are drinking a lot often. 825, that category, which I'm in anymore. The rate of binge drinking was 37.9%. So the younger the adult, the statistics, or the percentage of that group of adults are bingers, and 11.3% admit to being heavy drinkers. Now, about young people, 12 to 17, current use 11.6%, but binge drinking 62% of youth and 1.2% heavy drinkers. So is that important? Well, the young people who are getting their first experience in using, in many cases abusing or misusing alcohol, are same people who are going to be coming and knocking on your door looking for a job just a year or two down the road. And a large number, 1.2% of them, admit to be drinkers already. 6.2% admit to being binge drinkers. And of course, as we pointed out, we're already looking at 38%. So those dark numbers, the bold ones there at the bottom, 6.2 and 1.2%, you see how those jump up to 11.3% when they become young adults, when they, get to school. All use going on and misuse. Now, what it does that I very much appreciate is over about a 5-year period of time, they'll take all of this data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, break it down into industries and into occupations. And so recently, just last month, the Fed released these industry-specific statistics for the time 2008 to 2012. And then we compare it to the 5-year period before that, 2003 to 2007. This is important because it gives us an idea of where the majority of users and alcohol abusers are in terms of industries and occupations. So for the mining industry is the #1 industry for past heavy alcohol use. Talk about heavy alcohol use, not binge drinkers, not current users, but heavy users. 19.5%, that's up from 16% in the previous report, 2003 to 2007. And you can see construction's next, and then it goes into all the different industries after that. Now, some improved. Some of them went up. So what I did was I in the order that they would be in by today, or the latest report, 2008 to 2012. Now, break it down by occupation, but we do have the occupations from the 2003 to 2007 report, and as you can see there, most occupations, and sort of the top 6, are within the construction industry. So you've related to the construction industry. So you've got roofers, by far the highest percentage of heavy alcohol users. Electricians, carpenters, carpet, floor, tile installers and finishers, people who work on floors, construction laborers, and then just sort of a miscellaneous category of other construction-related workers. And then 0.8%, you can see construction equipment operators. And when I first saw that years ago, I was thankful that the percentage of construction equipment operators that being heavy alcohol users wasn't higher, right? Because they're the people who are operating these big heavy machinery. But 12% is pretty high still. So with the construction industry, a lot of alcohol abuse going on, unfortunately. And 10.2%. Now, this is not every industry, but the 10.2% at the bottom there for retail, that's a percentage as well. It dwarfs by comparison to the roofers at 25.7%, but at an unacceptable level. If you're an employer, that's cause for concern. 15% in the food and beverage servers, occupation within the food and beverage industry, sales representatives, et cetera, et cetera. But then down to cooks at 11.9 and retails at 10.2. And then let's just go back just for a moment to the list of industries. And construction did go a little bit from 15.6 to 16.5. And if you go to some industries that we typically think of, right, when we were out there selling drug and alcohol testing, come down, well, there's retail trade, that's 9.3 compared to today. Manufacturing, 9.2, went to 9.7. Transportation and warehousing, 8.7, 8.8, pretty much kind of the same. The other ones that have sort of traditionally been at the bottom of the list of industries. So what's why we did that? Interesting, of course, but if we're in the drug and alcohol testing business, then we're dealing with companies that are in all of these different industries. And you may occasionally run into somebody who thinks, well, alcohol abuse really isn't a problem in our company. And so if it's a mining company, a construction company, et cetera, they're in the retail industry, the manufacturing, et cetera, it's important to put these statistics out there and pose the same question that I posed at the beginning, which is, what's the possibility that none of these people work for you? Work is a problem. Alcohol users and alcohol misuse create behaviors and outcomes from behavior that cost employers money, and unfortunately sometimes has fatal consequences as well. Now, these 3 slides are going to some statistics that I got from the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, NCAD. And I recommend, and I'm going to show you a slide where you can find the URL to go to their website, but I recommend going there. This is a long-standing organization, very responsible, information and providing good information, good, accurate information to just us in this industry, but people in all walks of life. Workers' alcohol problems, 2.7 times more likely than workers without drinking problems, an injury-related absence from work. Hospital emergency department studies showed that 35% of patients with an occupational injury were drinkers. And breath test detected alcohol in 16% of emergency room patients injured at work. And then the fourth one, the latest analyses of workplace fatalities shows 11% of the victims had been drinking at the time of the incident that resulted in their death. Now, some some other studies, as you see here. Well, because this one's important. One of workers and managers across a wide range of industries and company sizes report that a coworker's on or off job drinking jeopardizes their own productivity and safety. What's actually saying is that the non-alcohol user, the worker and manager without an alcohol problem, their own safety and ability to do their job was being jeopardized by alcohol abuse of a coworker. That's important to understand. It's an important message to get out to people that you do business with, because not just the alcohol user, it's who are affected by alcohol users. Now, there's specific kinds of drinking that can be a problem for the workplace. These are people who drink right before or during work hours, and heavy drinking the night before that can cause individuals to come to work with a hangover, which affect their ability to do or could affect their ability to do their job. And just in you are mindset, and I was years ago until I did a lot more research on this, to think the quote alcoholic who's the problem. Most of the time, it's a problem drinker who's not really risen to the level of an alcoholic by clinical definition, who is in your workplace. So sometimes it's a non-dependent drinker, as CAD likes to use that term. The person occasionally drink too much, but they're exclusively by an alcohol-dependent employee, and also family members living with someone who's an alcoholic. So you have people in your employment who are not only alcohol users at all, or not problem drinkers, but they live an alcoholic, and their job performance suffers because of the sort of carryover effect of living with, being married to, or having in their family or in their household a problem drinker. And as you can see, it can a lot of things, including that on alcohol abuser employees at work. Absenteeism can be affected by that. So here I want to refer you to, I'll just pause here 1 second if you want to take note right now, but you're going to have access to these slides as well. But and I've known of this organization for 20 years or so to be a very good source of this kind of information. I want to throw in a couple of things that may be related to the majority of people on today's call. You may not deal with criminal justice or with law enforcement in terms of the type of business that you do, but it's also hard to know that alcohol is a significant factor in crime. 40% of all violent crimes today are somehow affected by alcohol. That includes 37% rapes and sexual assaults, and 27% of aggravated assaults, 15% robberies. So, and this is probably not to anybody, of course, but alcohol does affect people's ability to operate vehicles safely. There are literally thousands of people who are killed each year in the United States, alcohol-related accidents. Many thousands more are injured. And it results, of course, in billions of dollars in cost, but it's really the loss of life that, is the system and the thing of great concern. Oftentimes, it's not the alcohol abuser, the person who's driving under the influence who is injured or killed, but an innocent person who's in a car that's, in a crash with an alcohol abuser. I think it's quite interesting. 1.4 million people are arrested, DWI offense each year. Only 780,000 are actually convicted, but 2/3 of those who are sentenced to incarceration are repeat offenders. So 2/3 of, say, 780,000 are people who've been through the criminal justice system already and come out of it. They're behind the wheel of a car under the influence of alcohol, and they've caused a problem again, or hopefully law enforcement has pulled them over for unsafe driving and been able to hurt anybody. But unfortunately, we know that oftentimes somebody does get hurt. Alcohol screening has proven to be an effective tool or weapon in the war against substance abuse. It's alcohol misuse by some people. It identifies people who need help depending on what your the drug-free workplace program is, but different alcohol testing methods that are available. It may not be a matter of wanting the best of all of them or better than all of them. It's down to which one is best for you, which makes sense for your company or for a particular client, and it's dictated by federal regulations. DOT, for example, I'm going to talk about this in a second, but you can do breath, you can do saliva. You're going to use a product that's on the conforming products list that's put out by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, but, it's dictated to you in a way. Some state laws are the same way. See on the screen here, primarily we're talking about blood, breath, saliva, and urine. And under regulations, you're limited to, the two that I just mentioned. I shouldn't say many, but a good number of state laws and alcohol testing in the workplace will defer to 49 CFR Part 40 to the federal regulations when it comes to lots of procedural process issues. What assessment can you use? What devices are permitted? What qualifications do you have? Does the device have? Like a hearing on the conforming products list, that type of thing. And instances, they'll go as far as to sort of wholly opt the DOT regulations, and they'll refer to the U.S. Department of Transportation in the law of that state and say that an employer must, conduct alcohol testing in accordance with, these regulations that are put out by the U.S. Department of Transportation, or they might refer to SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or might say 49 CFR Part 40. And when they do, then of course those employers in that state must alcohol test in a way consistent with, say, for example, a DOT program. So it would be we might refer to that as a DOT look-alike alcohol testing program. In some cases, at the state outside of the DOT regulations, when you're not mandated to alcohol test in accordance with the DOT regulations, then it becomes a matter of company choice. And so you do have some options. Blood, the smartest people in the drug and alcohol testing industry will refer to blood as the gold standard. It's accurate detecting an alcohol. But it's very invasive, it's very time-consuming, it's very costly, and there are many states that do not allow employers to conduct blood testing in normal situations. But of course, in post-mortem situations, but that's when an employer is going to typically be involved in processing. There are some states, just a few, under the voluntary workers' comp law in Minnesota, where they require alcohol testing to be conducted by laboratory, make specific reference to blood alcohol testing, but it's very, very uncommon. So it's much, much more common. So as an alcohol testing method is fairly popular, only a screening test, okay, not an evidentiary test, but popular in many workplace settings because it's typically easy to do. It's less expensive. If you're just screening to find out if the individual tests positive or negative, with that, if it's positive, you're going to either conduct some type of test to an evidentiary breath test, for example, to confirm that, in fact, the individual is at 0.04 or high, whatever your level is that you're using. Then saliva testing is a great choice. It makes it possible to do a test very quickly, right on the spot. Usually we're talking about a disposable, one-time use product. And there are some saliva testing devices that are on the conform products list. Put in QE, for example, from OraSure Technologies. I'll give them a little shameless plug here, being the host of today's webinar. The QE device is on the conforming products list. So certainly refer to the conforming products list or to the NHTSA list. But I would advise anybody who's doing alcohol testing to use a saliva device that's on that CPL. That would be a very, very sort of way to go in terms of alcohol testing with saliva. Now, because it's a very common specimen for drug testing, employers just sort of punt on the issue, and they'll instruct their laboratory to test the saliva or urine specimen for alcohol as well as whatever drugs they're testing for. But and sometimes can be sufficient. There are limitations when it comes to urine. So because of something known as the fermentation process, which is caused by the presence or the occurrence of glucose in urine, it's a viable, less stable method for alcohol detection. We're going to end up with false positive results. These are it's going to show levels that appear to be higher than what they really are in a urine sample versus breath, which we're going to talk about in a second, and certainly blood and saliva. So not common, not a very popular method for workplace alcohol screening, although you will see companies that will sort of throw it into their drug test panel, so to speak, and test for alcohol while they're testing for drugs, but you're not going to see as much of that. Breath, very, very popular, very common. Breath testing is permitted under the DOT regulations. You'll find both evidentiary breath test devices and screening devices on the conforming products list that's put out by NHTSA. It's not a method. The one you're going to run into, and many employers complain about this, is that not all collection facilities where you're sending individuals to avoid a urine sample offer EBT services. So, and because an EBT has to be performed by a trained individual, and because there are other things that come into play, these are sensitive devices that have to be operated on a regular basis. You have too many employers that have EBTs on site at their own workplace with trained operators, breath alcohol testing technicians, we refer to them as, employment. So it's a great go. If it's a non-evidentiary breath test, you must confirm that result either with blood or with an evidentiary breath test if you're using the screening device. But you will occasionally run into problems. There are lots of EBTs and breath screening devices that are found on the conforming products list. Just a matter of seeing which one works for you. And that's really where somebody like Mike comes into play, because this is a service that they provide. They do, they do a lot of things at Alpha Pro Solutions. I've been Mike and Alpha Pro Solutions for a long, long time. I mentioned earlier, I'm excited about what Mike has to say from a real-world perspective, because he's dealing with clients on a regular basis who are doing alcohol testing. People of Blurry, I really apologize for the haziness of this. I just took a couple of screenshots real quick of some of what you would find at the APS website, but they really do offer a very diverse lineup of courses for various training. And I'll let Mike explain a little bit more about that, but Mike actually deals with companies that do this on a regular basis. And so let's unmute Mike's phone, Jessica, and I'd like to introduce at this time Mike Dyer, the president of Alpha Pro Solutions.
I really appreciate it. I do like to want to take a second to thank you and OraSure for asking me to come on and I guess share just a couple different stories. We set up some clients that we have and that we have discussed with in regards to alcohol testing and really the importance of alcohol testing and everything. Like Bill said, we do a lot of the training. That's a bulk of what we do and everything, but we also do testing and everything as well. And, we're talking to clients, it seems like every single day with different things and different questions that they have on what they can do. But again, thank you, Bill, and OraSure to have us on. One point that I do want to stress that Bill mentioned a little bit earlier was in regards to alcohol testing and how it's kind of put on the back burner, I guess you could say, so to speak. It's definitely something that we have found out over the years being in business that people think, oh, alcohol testing, alcohol is a legal drug. It's not that big of a deal, but as we just saw with Bill's mention, that it is a big deal because the numbers are absolutely huge in regards to people using alcohol. One of the things is we all know what type of testing that people do in regards to DOT aspects. Reasonable suspicion testing, I want to kind of take a second to talk about that and the importance of reasonable suspicion testing. Probably I want to say the least used, and I don't have the numbers of this, and Bill, I'm not sure if you or not, in regards to the percentage of reasonable suspicion tests that are done, and also the percentages of reasonable suspicion tests that come up positive. When I talk to clients in regards to reasonable suspicion testing, we kind of talk about it as a positive. Don't go in there and say, this guy, you're going to be positive for this. I think you've been drinking on the job. We kind of say, let's rule this out. And there was this one company that I fought with and said, you got to do reasonable suspicion training, or testing, if you believe individuals are under the influence of either drugs or alcohol. And a great example, I was at a client's office in the parking lot, and I see this brand new Tahoe, all decked out, everything, you name it, it has it on it. Beautiful, beautiful car. So I'm sitting in there talking to the owner, and I said, man, someone's got a nice new Tahoe out there. He said, oh, it's mine. I just bought it about a month ago, so on and so forth. One of his drivers comes in, and he asks about his route. And I kind of said, did you smell like he had like an alcohol-type odor? I could be wrong. Hey, man, this guy's been working for me for 15 years. I know him. He's a good guy, and this and that. Maybe mouthwash, breath spray, something like that. Now, you know your people more than I do. I'd say probably about 10, 15 minutes later, all of a sudden we hear a little crash, and we thought something just off the shelf or something like that. And lo and behold, the driver comes in and says, boss, I got something to tell you. He just into his car. And he said, what should we do? And I said, well, the first thing I do is drug and alcohol test him. He alcohol tested him, he blew at a .85. And because of the lack of not wanting to do the suspicion testing and things like that, actually cost him a car. Because his car was pretty messed up. And, it's one of those things where testing is very, very important to do. You'll make sure that in regards to the testing and things like that, that if you as a company and as an employer think that someone is wrong, make sure you have supervisors there that are trained can actually do that. Another instance, I guess you say real life instance, I was conducting training classes. And in a couple of different training classes at different times, I've had people blow positive in there. Bill kind of talked about drinking the night before, then coming to work. And lo and behold, we did have people who do that. And that will go out the night before, have a beer or two, or 3 or 4, and blow positive the next morning. So now it's just a hangover effect where, we're all slush and so on and so forth, as well, that the individual was still intoxicated. He still had a positive test result in their system at 9 o'clock that next morning. Don't know how much the individual drank or what they were drinking, but that's something to where being aware of your employees and being aware of what they do and how different changes can be. And don't be afraid to test people because it's probably a lot more than we think it is, and it's very important to maybe don't do that. And going back to the first example, to where the owner's car was destroyed or because of one of his own employees. I asked him, I said, one thing you could be thankful for, it was just your car, that it was just empty, the drunk had hurt, and he wasn't on the road to where he was able to hurt someone else. I know I kind of referred to that a little bit earlier in regards to the number of people to where either killed or are injured because of drunk driving. So you know, I'd just be thank God it's not that. That is kind of in-house, I guess you can say, that it was just your car and not somebody else. Just kind of little things I wanted to share in regards to real-life incidences, what happens out there, how important testing really is, and that it is a real danger. And I think a lot of people believe that that alcohol is a acceptable or a legal drug, that it's not as bad as others, and that definitely is not the truth. What we saw that Bill showed earlier. So those are just kind of a couple little stories that I wanted to share.
Okay.
Bill, not sure if you have any other questions or anything like that. I'll be more than happy to field.
I have a question for you, Mike. Let me preface it by just sharing an experience that I had many years ago when I was new in the industry. I was in a group where the very, very senior executive of a very large company, I won't say which company, but certainly a Fortune 50 company, was making a presentation about the company's drug and alcohol testing program, and was very proud to let us know that in the last year they had conducted some neighborhood of about 1,000 random drug and alcohol tests the year before. When he was asked how many reasonable suspicion drug alcohol tests that they had done at the same time, he admitted that they had only done 30. So they had done 30,000 random tests. They'd only done 30 reasonable suspicion tests. And I get a question for you, Mike, and this is, really sort of, in-house as being one premier of training services. What kind of, and you referred to this with this client there, what kind of training do supervisors, managers, even employers need in order to have an effective alcohol testing program if they'd be doing reasonable suspicion testing?
The D requires for most of their agencies to have 1 hour of drug testing. Some of them are 2, and then 1 hour of alcohol testing. Basically, it's the physiological behaviors of the individual, their gait, their speech, their eye movements, and things like that. Our courses are very comprehensive in regards and get into what happens, if they're drinking or this drug, that drug, so on and so forth. It's more of being able to execute it. And one common theme that I hear when doing the classes live in person is some supervisors are like, I don't feel comfortable having other supervisors because a lot of the modal agencies require 2 people to, kind of back each other up. I see this, do you see the same type of thing? I see he's kind of not able to walk in a straight line and holding himself up. You still see that as well. And I commonly hear these supervisors say, well, I don't want to get involved and I don't want to be that second opinion. And I said, well, in that situation, one of these days you're going to need that second opinion. You've got to be that second opinion. And I'm doing is helping everyone out, and I just kind of throw it back at them and say, point of how like this individual driving on the road with, your spouse and kids or family or something like that. Do you want that to happen? But you got to really, embrace it. You got to, it's easy to do the random testing, like you said, with those numbers are huge. It's do that because you're told this is what you have to do. Reasonable suspicion testing, you got to observe the individual. Once you observe the individual, then you sit down and talk to the individual. And I don't use the word confront them because it kind of, to me, it's a combative type word, but discuss what you saw with the individual and rule out the drugs or the alcohol. But that's probably the hardest thing. But if they're trying to do it and if they look at it as a more of a safety issue instead of, well, it's this person against me type issue. But there's definite part that needs to be that the supervisors need to understand, that the company owners need to understand in regards to and symptoms of the drug and alcohol use or misuse. So this way that they'll be able to identify these situations and be able to correct them. And that's kind of the goal, and that's what I tell people. We're not here to to shun people of jobs and to push them out and this and that. We're here to correct an issue that they have. And I think Bill would kind of agree, and probably most of the people on the call would kind of agree. If we can lower those numbers that we saw, it's going to help everybody out. And this is one way to do that. Looking at it as, we're going to send him for a reasonable suspicion test. He's positive. Now let's look at it as, in case he was positive, let's get him the help that the individual needs and hopefully be able to kick whatever addiction that he has.
Thank you, Mike. And let me just say, as we go into the concluding part of the presentation today, if you have any questions, of course, please submit them. We've got some sitting here in the queue. And that we don't get to, we'll make sure that we do answer your questions after the webinar. But also, you're going to receive a link that will take you to the recording of today's presentation, and so make the slides from today's presentation available to you. So it is something that everybody who registered for today's webinar is going to receive. Now, let me just take a minute, kind of play off of what Mike was just talking about in terms of reasonable suspicion testing, random testing, specifically for alcohol. As to state laws, federal regulations, and in particular the Americans with Disabilities Act, because there are some limitations when it comes to alcohol testing, do not apply to drug testing. But for state, that you're going to do alcohol testing, and Mike and I have both been involved in this part of the industry in providing policy writing services, you've got to make sure that your policy clearly states what it is that you do. So it's essential that you, your supervisors, your managers, if you're an owner of a company, that you become trained as well, so when a situation arises. But your policy has to state when to conduct alcohol testing, who's to be subject to alcohol testing, under what circumstances, and if there are other things related to it. And those things are often going to be dictated by laws that apply to you. So the question I often get asked is, I'm in multiple states, so which law do I go by? The state that's in my headquarters state, my home state, or well, there's all of them. So you are obligated to comply with the state drug testing and alcohol testing laws of all the states where you have business operations. So your policy has to reflect the legal requirements and restrictions that apply in the various states where you do business. Sometimes these state laws will be very specific when it comes to alcohol testing, as to the specimens permitted, the BAC level that would be considered a positive. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes these state laws simply punt on the issue of alcohol testing and defer to federal regulations. If you're a DOT mandated employer, of course, you're going to have a DOT policy and you're going to be doing alcohol testing in compliance with the DOT regulations. And those regulations, say you're under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration regulations, those trump state laws. So if you're in a state that, for example, has limitations on random alcohol testing, a state law, but covered under the DOT regulations, those federal regulations under DOT are going to trump any restrictions or limitations that may exist at the state level. So be aware that federal law almost always trumps state law, but your policy has to reflect the laws, be they state or federal, that apply to your company. I mentioned of this company that did 30,000 random drug tests, but only 30 reasonable suspicion tests. And that's why I asked Mike about the training, because that's an important part of making sure that you have a program in place that works, that will give you the best chance at achieving your drug and alcohol testing objectives. There are states, however, where reasonable suspicion also requires, where post-accident also requires reasonable suspicion. So accident takes place, and you have sort of parameters that apply to alcohol testing in a post-accident scenario. But there are some states where you're also going to have to suspect alcohol factor in the accident before you're allowed to do alcohol testing in that particular state. And why I go back to the training that Mike talked about. Your supervisors and your managers, the ones that are out there on the floor, out there in the field, who make those calls on the spot, if they're trained properly, if they understand what your policy says, and they've been trained to spot the signs and symptoms of alcohol abuse and know how to administer an alcohol test for your company, for example, using a disposable alcohol testing device, then you're going to, get to the end of the year and found out you did 1,000 random tests and 2 reasonable suspicion tests or 2 post-accident tests. The training that you invested in will make a big difference. Now, one of the things that comes up very often, I realize we're getting a little bit short on time here, so let me go through it quickly, is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And a quote from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission language as it relates to what type of tests employers can do and which ones can't do, or they have limitations on doing when it comes to testing for drugs and alcohol. In the EEOC guidelines, it says a covered entity, meaning an employer, for example, shall require a medical examination and shall not make inquiries of an employee as to whether such employee is an individual with a disability or as to the nature and severity of the disability unless such examination or inquiry is shown to be job-related and business necessity. Job-related and consistent with business necessity are critical terms when you're doing alcohol testing in the workplace, because alcohol testing is limited to circumstances in which the employer can show that their job-related concern that is consistent with something important necessary to that business, like compliance with federal law or concern safety because you're dealing with safety-sensitive workers that maybe aren't under the ADA or the DOT regulations. So ADA, what is considered a medical examination? Medical examination is a procedure or test that seeks information about an individual's physical or mental impairments or health. Medical examinations include, but are not limited to, and a whole list of them, but the one I pulled out is the one that applies here today, blood, urine, and breath analyses to check alcohol use. So very specifically, a test for alcohol use is considered a medical examination and therefore is limited or restricted per the previous page. What's not restricted, what's not considered a medical examination? A drug test. Current users are a protected class under the ADA. Legal drug users aren't protected under the ADA. Therefore, medical examination, and I should say therefore, okay, it's exactly apples to apples, but test under the ADA is not considered a medical examination, whereas an alcohol test is considered a medical examination, and for some restrictions do come into play. Now, how, alcohol testing does the ADA permit? Well, compliance with the federal regulations, right? They'll trump the ADA. Where you may be limited in being able to do random alcohol testing outside DOT regulations, under regulations. If you're a covered employer and you're random alcohol testing under the federal regulations, you do that random alcohol testing. The ADA does not get you off the hook for that random alcohol testing. All employers may administer alcohol tests to enforce a policy where tests are job-related and consistent with business necessity. You're going to have a hard time making that claim on just sort of universal random alcohol testing of all of your workers. But you can, as Mike was referring to, make a very, very strong argument for reasonable suspicion alcohol testing or post-accident alcohol testing, sort of no-brainers, okay? Now, the alcohol test could be considered job-related, as we talked there, but this is from the EEOC guidelines. If the employer's ability to perform his essential job functions is impaired by alcohol use, and if the employee is a direct threat to himself or others. So we're talking about safety-sensitive workplaces, we're talking about post-accident, reasonable suspicion, etc. Speaking, pre-alcohol testing is not permitted because of the ADA, but there have been some legal precedents set for random testing alcohol that's somewhat related to pre-employment testing. We always consult a drug test expert whoever in your program with, to make sure that your program, your alcohol testing, is consistent and in compliance with state laws that apply to you. Make sure it's written into your policy. Make sure you educated your employees as to when you'll do alcohol testing, how alcohol testing will be administered, and by all means, if you're going to do reasonable suspicion alcohol testing, make sure you've trained your supervisors and your managers so that they know what's expected of them, and to administer your program fairly and consistently. And by consistently, I mean consistent with the state laws that apply to your company. Then you do alcohol testing in the workplace. And as Mike and I have argued throughout this presentation, you probably should be doing more alcohol testing than maybe you have been doing in the past. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the formal part of our presentation. I do want to, because there's a couple of questions here in the Q&A on this, that the slides will be available. The link to the recording of today's presentation also will be made available. Jessica's going to handle all of that as soon as I turn the virtual microphone back over to her. I want to thank OraSure Technologies for hosting this webinar today, which they do every month. Next month, and I don't have the date in front of me, but everybody who's on today's webinar will be invited to next month's webinar, which will be on the new proposed mandatory guidelines for lab-based oral fluid drug testing. Some of you are probably aware, and you've been following the issue closely, the federal government, SAMHSA, has finally come out and published proposed guidelines for lab-based oral fluid drug testing. They're complex. There's a lot of information in there. We're going to do a webinar next month on that topic and show you and pull up highlights, show you what's being proposed and how it could affect your company. So with that, out to you. But thanks to OraSure for their monthly webinar series. Thanks again to Mike Dyer from Alpha Pro Solutions for part in today's presentation. Questions for OraSure or Alpha Pro Solutions, they'd be happy to take your calls, receive your emails, and follow up with you. And with that, let me turn the virtual microphone back over to Jessica to let you know how you can get a hold of today's presentation.
Thank you, Mike. And on behalf of OraSure Technologies and Alpha Pro Solutions, we hope that you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.